So there's this one shul, every year they would come to the Parsha where Yankov would tell Yosef to go to his brothers, and then they would throw him in a pit. This woman would scream out from the women's shul, "Yosef, don't go! They're going to throw you into a pit!" So one year, finally, the Baal Shem Tov, the one reading the Torah, he got tired of it. So he came up to that line, and he waited. He stopped. Let her do her disruption, finish, and then he'll go on. And he waits, and it's silent. He waits. Still silent. So finally he turns to her and says, "Are you going to interrupt?" And she says, "No." He says, "Why not?" She says, "Listen, he went last year. He went the year before. He went the year before that. If he's not going to learn, that's it. I'm tired of warning him." Parshas Masei. Eila Masei b'nei Yisrael. These are the journeys of the Jewish people. 42 jaunts in the wilderness. The Baal Shem Tov taught, it's brought to us in the sefer of his grandson, the Degel Machne Ephraim, that the Masei b'nei Yisrael, these are the journeys of the Jewish people, are not just speaking collectively, historically, about the Jewish people who came out of Egypt and entered the Holy Land, but really it's speaking to each and every one of us in every single time. Every single Jewish person will live out these 42 journeys. Leaving Egypt is birth. Entering the good wide land is when we leave the body after 120 and enter the world to come. And all the 40 journeys in between are all the different stations in life, all the different milestones, the things that happen to a person in a lifetime. So obviously this begs the question, does that mean that life is scripted? Does that mean that life is already laid out and there's really no free choice? It's all predetermined. That's one question. Then there's another question, more specific question, which is, if our lives follow the 42 journeys in the desert, well, a lot of those journeys were connected with bad stuff. I mean, failures, spiritual failures on the part of our ancestors. So basically, not only is my life scripted, but it's scripted to have a lot of failure, negative moments, lowlights, as opposed to highlights. So how am I supposed to understand that? So, in order to begin to understand this, we have to understand the difference between potential and actuality. The truth is that every single one of those incidents that transpired in the desert, at every one of those 42 stops, could have been positive, had the potential to be glorious. And free choice is what determines which direction it will go. So there are two potential directions, a glorious moment or abysmal failure. But the potential there is for it to be glorious. For instance, I'll give you an example. One of the stops along the way is called Kivras HaTaiva. Kivras HaTaiva literally means the graves of craving. Why? Because the Jews were craving meat in an inappropriate way, in an animalistic way, and it led to many deaths, and many people died there. So they were buried by their lust. Graves of craving. But Chassidus explains that really, potentially, that challenge, they could have overcome that. They could have conquered their lust instead of their lust conquering them, and then instead of being graves of craving, it would have been craving's grave. They would have buried craving. In Kivras HaTaiva, the same name, same stop, same situation, same test, just instead of failure, it would have been passing with flying colors. So the potential there was for glory. I'll give you another example, the quintessential example, the greatest moral failure of the Jewish people in the 42 journeys and the greatest moral failure in history. On par with the sin of the tree of knowledge. The sin of the golden calf. How is that potentially good? How could that have been good? That's such abysmal failure. Well, where did they get the idea of a golden calf? There are many explanations, but one of them is that at the time of the revelation at Sinai, the time of Matan Torah, the nation experienced mass prophecy. They were elevated to the levels of the greatest prophets. One of the things the great prophets saw was the Merkava, the celestial chariot. And one of the features of the Merkava, the celestial chariot, is the Pnei Shor, the face of the ox, which is really an angelic being, which metaphorically or symbolically has the face of an ox. The point is, that's the image they saw, which is a very lofty image. In fact, it's in the Haftorah on Shavuos. When we read about the giving of the Torah, we read that prophecy of the Merkava, the chariot with the different faces on the chariot. Pnei Shor, the face of the ox. Now, later on, they misused that vision, and they turned it into Rachmana litzlan. The merciful should protect us from such a failure to turn that into an image of an idol. But in its source, in its potential, it could have been an incredible thing. It could have been a glorious thing. It could have been, the golden calf didn't have to literally be a golden calf of idolatry, God forbid. It could have been in a completely different form. It could have been a completely different, the story, it's hard to even rewrite it because it didn't happen this way. But in theory, it could have been something very holy, where they didn't make a golden calf, they didn't make a statue, there was no idol worship. It was something very holy and pure and very God conscious, involving their vision of seeing the face of the ox on the side of the chariot, but with no idolatry whatsoever. To the contrary, only worship of God. It could have been. Not only it could have been, it should have been. Except there's free will, and so that's not what happened. Now, I want to get a little bit more pointed into the example of Chet HaEgel, of the golden calf, and bring out an example from an actual figure in history who had his own golden calf moment. When our sages talk about sinners, when they talk about someone who was a real failure morally, the quintessential example they hold up is Yerovam ben Nevat, Jeroboam, the king. It says in Pirkei Avos, he's an example of a guy who can't even do tshuva. He sinned, he made others sin. How did he sin? How did he make others sin? He was jealous. There was a schism. There were two kingdoms. The Beis HaMikdash, the Holy Temple, was in the other kingdom. He didn't want his subjects going to the other kingdom. So he built a competition with the Beis HaMikdash, Lahavdil. And he built an idol, a golden calf. An abysmal failure. Terrible, terrible, terrible sin. The worst sin possible. And the question is, did it have to be that way? Did Yerovam have to be such a moral failure? And the answer, obviously, we've just said, no, it didn't have to be this way. It could have been completely different. Let me tell you where Yerovam comes from. Let me tell you a little bit about his background. You know who Yerovam's chavrusa was, his study partner? Achia Shaleni. Achia was someone who went out from Mitzrayim. He was a child when he went out from Mitzrayim. Later on, he was the teacher of Eliyahu Navi. Eliyahu Navi, the great Elijah the prophet. He learned from Achia Shaleni. And Yerovam was chavrusas. He was study partners with Achia. And it says, the Gemara tells us, that when Achia Shaleni used to learn with Yerovam ben Nevat, Yerovam was so sharp in his studies that would study the laws of sacrifices, of Kodshim, and every halacha, Yerovam would bring out 103 novel interpretations, 103 chidushim from every halacha. Now what's 103? Why 103? It's a funny number. You know what 103 is? B'gematria, Egel, calf. Ayin is 70, Gimel is 3, Lamed is 30, 70 plus 3 plus 30, 103. Well, hold on a second. So what does that mean? That means even back when he was good, when Yerovam was still holy and he was still studying Torah and he was Achia Shaleni's friend, you see the seeds of the evil that came out later. The 103, the calf, was always there all along. No, it's the opposite. It's the exact opposite. From the fact that you can see the 103 was there from the beginning, you see what it should have been, what it could have been. The glorious potential it had. Now he squandered that potential, and he did the worst possible sin, and it turned into a golden calf. But just like the Jewish people, The golden calf didn't have to be the golden calf. It could have been the Pnei Sher on the Merkava, the face of the ox on the side of the chariot. They didn't have to squander it. They didn't have to drop the bowl. So you see with Yerovim, his connection to the golden calf didn't have to be the golden calf. It could have been Egel in the sense of 103 novel interpretations of every halacha. What's the point? The point is like this. Let's take it personal. Think of your moment of greatest spiritual failure. I don't want to cause anyone any pain, but for the purposes of growth, for a moment, not beat yourself up. It's not the time right now. This is not cheshbon and nefesh time. We're not making a moral inventory. But for the purposes of reflection at this moment, think of your moments that you are appalled at yourself about. The thoughts where it's more than cringeworthy, where you are ashamed of the person who you were. Your lowest moments. Not your lowest moments where people caused you pain. I'm not talking about that. That's a different subject for a different time. I'm talking about your lowest moments where you were the culprit and you're ashamed and you're appalled at yourself. I want to tell you something. That lowest moment of your life could have been the most glorious moment of your life. It didn't have to become a downfall. It could have been an amazing success with just a different choice. It would have been, think about that. Your moment of failure could have been your moment of breakthrough that would have lifted you up to such a powerful level. Coulda, shoulda, woulda. Now we're all feeling regretful. We're feeling mournful. We're feeling remorse. That's not my point. Because I want to finish. I want to tell you something. The fact that that moment of failure could have been a moment of glory means this. It still can be a moment of glory. Because in potential it was good all along, and we messed it up, but only temporarily. We can go back and we can get it, we can retrieve it, we can transform it. We can reclaim it. How can we reclaim it? Because all along, really, it was positive. It was positive all along. It was always supposed to be good. Okay, so we messed it up. But we can go back and reclaim the inherent positivity, the potential that was there. And that is through what's called teshuvah. Teshuvah me'ahava. Returning to Hashem out of love. And when we do that, zdainis nasa like kazachias mamish, even wanton culprit sins, where we purposely sinned, we were rebelling, the worst of the worst of the worst, can be transformed not only to be canceled out, but to become merits. Why? Because when we look back and we see, how did I let something separate me from Hashem? It pains me so much I let something separate me from Hashem. And that pain becomes the springboard to greater sensitivity and greater vigilance, where we are so careful to nurture the precious bond that we have with Hashem. And if we had never been cut off like that, we would never today cherish so much our connection. So this moment of failure becomes a moment of glory. Becomes transformed from negative, the lowest moment of your life, through teshuvah, to a springboard to totally new growth. And the reason it's able to become transformed into something positive, because really all along that's what it was. Except that we squandered it temporarily for the moment. But all along it was really positive, could have been positive, and will become positive. And of course, this lesson is connected to the 3 weeks right now that we're in, the 3 weeks of mourning, which the Rambam paskins as a matter of halacha in Hilchos Tainius, that these days of mourning will be transformed into Yemei Sasin V'Simcha. The fact that the Jewish people fell so low in the time leading up to the destruction of the temple only shows us how it could have been a time of such high accomplishment. They fell low because that was commensurate and proportionate to the potential for soaring high. It was the lowest because it could have been the highest. And since it could have been the highest, this is the lesson for today, it still can be the highest. And so the destruction, the churban, the golus, the exile can become redemption and rebuilding and the perfection of the world, Mashiach. Because really that's what it was all along, except temporarily we got sidetracked because of free choice, which Hashem gives us. But we can use that same free choice to go back and reclaim it and rechannel it and take hold of the potential that was always there all along. And once we realize this, what do we realize? As we go through the 42 journeys of life, Whatever journey you're on, whatever number you're on, you have a certain number of journeys behind you. And you have a certain number of journeys ahead of you. So here are the rules. Whatever journeys we were already on, if we didn't do what we were supposed to do, we go back and we change it through teshuvah me'ava, repentance out of love. And whatever journeys we weren't yet on that we're going to approach, we're going to be so careful, so exceedingly careful to bring out that only the positive scenario should come out. So I'll close with a story. There was a shidduch between Rabbi Yisrael Ruzhiner and Rabbi Tzvi Hersher Menover. And the two potential or prospective mechtonim got together, they sat down. And the Ruzhiner started and he says, in our circles, when we talk about a shidduch, the first thing we do is we discuss yichus. So I'll tell you, my yichus is that I'm the great-grandson of the Maggid of Mezrich, the grandson of Avram der Malach. My great-uncle is Reb Nachum Chernobyler. My uncle is Reb Motel Chernobyler. What's your yichus? So Reb Tzvi Hersh said, my yichus? My parents died when I was 5, and my relatives couldn't support me. So they apprenticed me out to a tailor. And I was raised by this tailor. He was a simple guy. And basically, I had room and board in exchange for working in the tailor shop. And that was my upbringing. But I'll tell you, from my upbringing as the tailor's apprentice, I learned 2 things. Alte Sachen darf man verrichten und neue Sachen darf man nicht kalje machen. Old things need to be fixed and new things have to be protected from being spoiled. Fix the old and take care of the new. Rabbi Yisrael Ruzhiner heard this, he said, a good shidduch. As we go through the 42 journeys, whatever journeys are behind us, fix the old. Whatever journeys are ahead of us, take such care of the new. Every moment is potential glory. That's what it was designed for. That's what it was meant to be.